Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Hosfield, and I'm the founder of Youngtimers. And I also work at the University of California, Irvine as a neuroscientist. So today we'll be talking to Kristina in what we like to call our Youngtimers series community stories. And this is where we get an opportunity to hear from people who are within the early onset familial Alzheimer's disease community, the experiences that they've gone through, their perspective on things, and just to help allow them to tell their stories, but also to help others who might be struggling at a particular point in their disease journey. But anyway, I'm so excited that you've joined us, and we're so excited to have Kristina to hear what advice and perspective she can give on this difficult journey that is genetic testing. Kristina, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, my name's Kristina. I live in Philadelphia, and I have a family. I have a 3-year-old son and a husband. And currently, my mom is diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. She had the PSEN1 gene, and she is 56 years old, and she started having cognitive difficulties around 48.
Thank you for sharing your story. I'm so sorry to hear about your mom and that she is positive for the mutation in the presenilin-1 gene. So I think there's a lot of people out there who probably, when they hear about genetic testing and they have a family history, they're like, oh, that's definitely something I do not want to know. And then on the other side, you probably have people who are like, oh, there's a gene to know that. I definitely want to know that. And what this series can provide is some information and context for people who are in between those two perspectives. I think it would be really great for them to hear your story and how you arrived at that place of wanting to know your genetic status. So can you start us off with a little bit about your family history and what led you to making this really important decision?
What happened with my family is that for a very long time, people were getting Alzheimer's very early on, and we didn't understand what it was. And this was happening with like my grandfather's brother. My grandfather passed away when he was young, so it was his siblings and his mother, and then a lot of cousins. And then finally, one of our distant cousins went and got gene tested through the neurologist, and it turned out they had this PSEN1 gene, and they let her children know that there was the Diane study, and that they could also be tested for genetic testing. They should get tested. And they let us know it was 50% chance of having the gene, and different reasons why we should get tested. So once we found out about that one family member having the gene, they decided to have my mom tested to see if she had the same gene. And she did. And then it was up to her kids, at least the ones that are over 18, which ones want to get tested. I decided that I definitely wanted to know because I have a son, and I wanted to prepare my family, depending if it was positive or negative, to prepare if one of my brothers were positive, who would take care of my siblings. It just was a good idea to get tested. Fortunately, I was able to get tested through the VA system, the Veterans Health Administration. And yeah.
Being in this community, your story resonates with so many people, losing their mom in their 40s and 50s. And also just the idea that early on, the family just didn't know what was going on. There was this disease generation after generation, and they just didn't know what it was. And then to finally, put a name to it, it's very sad, but it's helpful as well. So what my next question is, you touched on this a little bit, your reasoning for wanting to pursue genetic testing. You said you definitely wanted to know because you have a son and you also wanted to prepare your family. But for those who don't get this feeling of knowing or are waiting for this feeling to just know that they're ready to find out their result, maybe it'll be helpful to walk them through your thought process in getting ready to know whether you have the mutation in presenilin-1.
I was watching my mom and seeing her cognition decline, watching my grandma prepare. My grandma's her caretaker, prepare what was needed next in life, moving her with my grandma, and then planning for her funeral services, which is all of this was very realistic, like it's coming soon. And so I just didn't want to leave my husband and my son not knowing what's going to happen or without life insurance. For me, it didn't feel fair to have them be shocked 10 years or 15 years from now when I could have known sooner. So I can't say I was always ready to know, but I knew that it was the right thing to do.
And looking back, is there anything that helped you prepare for your results?
My husband helped a lot. So we decided no matter what the results were going to be, I'd have somebody take care of me and he'd have assets after my passing. And I just thought I had to view, like my mom still has quality of life. You still have quality of life for a certain amount of time with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's isn't going to be the end of our world. And so I just knew that no matter what the results were, I would still have my son and my husband. We'd still have our life together.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great way to put it, to keep in our minds that even if you were to test positive for the mutation, there's still quality of life ahead, and it's not the end of the world. And as you see with your mom, that once you do receive a diagnosis, it's not immediate, it's kind of a slow decline. And also just having that perspective that no matter the result, you still had your son and husband. That's such a beautiful way to put it. You talked about you wanted to know because you have a son and you kind of wanted to plan.
Yes, we didn't find out until I was an adult, until I already had Langston. But if I were to have more children, I wanted to know in order to do, I don't remember what it's called, Lindsay, but basically if I'm gene positive and for our children wouldn't have the gene and go through like the whole IVF.
With PGD, yep.
Yeah. So we wanted to be able to, that's another reason we wanted to know. But we had also decided we were going to adopt after having Langston. So it wasn't a huge thing, but yet at the same time, it was something that we should know. And then my aunts who have older children, they wanted to know for the same reason, for their daughters to know and have that option. So it's good that even though I was an adult and already had Langston, it's really good that we all know about this gene for my cousins.
Yeah, the protocol, the assisted reproductive technology that you're referring to is IVF, or in vitro fertilization, and people sometimes call it different acronyms. It's either PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGT-M, which is pre-implantation genetic testing for a monogenic disease. They're the exact same thing, but if you're ever reading articles, that's what those are referring to. I mentioned this briefly in the beginning, but as I talk to people about genetic testing, there's these two main groups. And one is that a lot of people see knowledge as power, and it's empowering to take hold of their health and their life. And then there's other people who are kind of like lack of knowing status is their way to have hope for the future. But it sounds like you're definitely in the camp of people who believe that knowledge is power.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Looking back now, once you made the decision that you were going to pursue genetic testing, is there any advice or things that you were glad that you did, that you prepared beforehand, before you actually saw a genetic counselor, that you would recommend to others?
Prior to testing, I think the biggest thing, because I gave this advice actually to my uncle and aunt beforehand, is to apply for life insurance. It's something you should have anyway, but you don't want to get denied based on test results if you don't do like a blind testing. Because for me, I didn't mind it being under my name, but I wanted to make sure that I was covered. If you want long-term care insurance, I don't have it, but if that's something also you want to go about, then I would say that's one for the financial advice. As for going under genetic testing, for other advice, I would say definitely have a support person, because it's going to be very for me, it was very stressful waiting for the results, and the results don't just come back next day. I think it took 6 weeks for my results to come back. And it was a lot of sleepless nights, but it was a lot of encouragement from my spouse that everything was going to be okay no matter what. So I think having that support system, whether it be friends or family, is very important when you're getting tested.
And so was your support person your husband?
My husband and my friends.
Your friends.
Yeah. So I'm very lucky. I have a friend that's a researcher, and she's extremely supportive and knowledgeable about Alzheimer's. But yeah, I mean, my friends are all just a great support system. My husband's a great support system. I couldn't be happier with their support.
No, you're so right. Finding a support person, especially through those sleepless nights, waiting for the result to come, is such great advice, as well as making sure that, if you do want life insurance, if you do want long-term care insurance, that that's in place before you contact a genetic counselor, because you never know about the future. And I know that you weren't worried about being tested under your name, but just for any folks who are out there listening who are worried for privacy reasons, I have heard reports where people, not only in the early onset familial Alzheimer's disease community, but in other autosomal dominant diseases, like in Huntington's disease, that some genetic counselors will actually let patients get tested under a pseudonym. So that means a false name. But again, that's something that you have to talk to your genetic counselor about, because not all genetic counselors offer that, and it can be a little bit tricky to navigate. Sometimes I think not all genetic counselors are equal, and it might be good to find one that has a history of treating early onset, either familial Alzheimer's disease cases or Huntington's disease cases. How did you go about finding a genetic counselor?
For me, it was easy. You go through the Veterans Health Administration. You just go to your primary doctor and you tell them, and what they do is they connect you with their only genetic counselor, which is telehealth through St. Louis, I believe it is. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a referral process, and then that's how they pick the genetic counselor. Now, for my family members, they went through a neurologist in Michigan, and they had an easy time finding a genetic counselor just going through a neurologist. And once one family member is tested and has results, it's just like holding on to those results in order to give it to the genetic counselor and going from there. So it's been a pretty easy process for my family who's been using the VA system. Some have used VA and some have used civilian providers.
That's so great to hear that finding a genetic counselor wasn't a huge obstacle for you. I'm so glad to hear that. And hopefully with the help of Youngtimers and other resources out there, others will also have a much easier time. And if they are having a difficult time, please reach out to us, because we love to be able to help. In our community, some people decide to not tell many people about getting genetic testing, and then others are very vocal about it. It can be hard to talk to family about it, because it's not just you're talking about siblings and cousins, and it can feel like a weight to them as well. How did you navigate that situation? Did you tell friends and family that you were going through this process?
I think it was great telling family, because it ended up getting all the other family members interested in testing, whether they wanted to test or not. And so once I got tested, actually my aunt and uncle ended up getting tested because I was tested. So once they saw how easy the process was, and it was something they decided they wanted to know, they went through with the testing. Our family does have a little small Facebook group where people talk about testing and genetic counseling and that kind of thing. Not super active, because you're not getting tested on a regular basis, but just for them to know, for people to know, like, there is a process to go through. So yeah, I think telling family for me was a good thing, because it actually got the ball rolling for other family members who wanted to know the information.
Wow, that's such a great idea to have a family Facebook group.
Right, I can't remember who started it, but one cousin started it, and my aunt invited me to it, and the only thing they talk about is Alzheimer's. So I'm not in the group too much, but it's good, because if somebody has a question about a study or testing or resources, then, they have other family members, and they're like very, there's distant cousins, there's uncles, aunts, it's just whoever.
So again, going back to how to talk to family and friends about this, I've heard that some people, what they'll end up doing is they'll say that they're undergoing genetic testing, but they won't give the exact date, for example, of when they'll get their test result. That way, they have some space to come to terms with their status within themselves and then within their immediate family, but then also have that support of others on the periphery. So I'm just curious, did you have a strategy for setting up boundaries so that you were receiving the news in the way that you wanted to receive it?
For me, I have no boundaries. So no, I'm just kidding. Like with my family, I'm just very much as I want them to know. So I let them know, like, yeah, I'm getting my test results at this time at 1:00. I'll call you after I get the phone call and let you know. And so after I got my results, I called my aunt, I called my grandma, I called my friends. I just all let them know the results, because I felt like they were in it with me. Like, they definitely are in it with me no matter what. And I thought it was just something that they needed to know. And so, yeah, I shared my results with everyone.
And did you think that it was helpful to have them in it with you versus keeping this information to yourself?
Yes, I definitely thought it was helpful because no matter what your results are, you're going to have a lot of emotions and conversations, and having the conversations of who's next to get the testing, if anyone is going to get the testing. It's a lot of family planning. I think with the gene being so prevalent in the family, it is like a family. It affects the whole. So
Yeah.
if one person is negative and one person is positive, then it might be likely that that person needs the other person for the support. So it's good for everyone to know what's going on.
That's such a great point. I think we tend to be very isolated sometimes in this disease, but again, just reminding ourselves that it affects the whole family, and whether somebody's negative or positive, there'll be ripple effects in that. So I'm glad that you were able to be so open with your family. So now you've undergone the testing. What is it like to be on the other side of finding out your genetic status?
I'm so glad that I found out. It's overwhelming. I think it was overwhelming not knowing. I'm the type of person that can't go on without knowing what's going to happen. I'm a big planner. And so if you're a big planning person, or you just want information, or you want to, know for your family, I think it's very important to find out either way. I cried, but I just was relieved to know, like, finally have an answer to what's been going on and what goes on with my mom and what goes on with our family. We have a name for it. And then finding all these supports afterwards with it. So that's even great that there's so many, not so many. Now there are organizations out there that can help you navigate younger onset Alzheimer's in studies, and there's hope. So I think there's always hope with it. I think that's a good thing to remember, is it's not the end all be all.
Oh, I'm so hopeful, especially after hearing the die-in results from gantenerumab, that they're affecting amyloid and tau and possibly neurofilament light chain, which is brain cells and brain cell loss. I mean, I have lots of hope, but I love how you say you have a name for it. It's not just this dark cloud hovering over you anymore.
It was so hard for so long where we didn't know what was happening. It just was like all these young people were just getting Alzheimer's, or like at one point we didn't even know it was Alzheimer's. We just thought it was some type of dementia or something. And to now know it's this gene and that this is what happens and this is how you can find out if you get it. It's just like a lot more questions answered instead of wondering what is going on with my family.
I just want to quickly clarify for everybody when you're talking about the genes. There are 3 genes that are associated with early onset familial Alzheimer's disease. There are other names for this disease, which I guess I can talk about briefly. So there's dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease. There's autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. There's familial Alzheimer's disease, and they're all basically the same thing. But the 3 genes that are associated with causing this are presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and APP, or amyloid precursor protein. And what you're referring to when you say you have the gene, it's actually a mutation in one of these 3 genes. And there's over 200 different mutations in these genes. So I just wanted to clarify for anybody out there. It happens a lot that people refer to genes and mutations interchangeably. So moving on to our next question. As a scientist, I'm super curious about looking at literature on this disease and trying to work out what have we found out about this and what does all of the scientific studies up till now tell us about it. And particularly, I'm interested in how people do over time, knowing whether or not they have the mutation that will cause the disease. There's some information about what it's like for individuals immediately after, maybe 3 months after, and a year after. What the literature says is that immediately, there's a lot of anxiety, possible depression, and that stays steady for about 3 months. And then slowly, over time and up into a year, most people return to their normal levels of anxiety. I don't know if anybody has seen TEDx talks about happiness. They had this one experiment where they looked at lottery winners and their happiness at different time points. And it turns out after a year, even after you won the lottery, you're at the same happiness level that you were before you win the lottery. And I guess what I would just like to ask you is if you can talk to us a little bit about how your relationship to your genetic status and the disease and even your life has changed over time.
I think I'm about a year and a half almost from knowing, maybe a little bit less than that. At first, it was just a lot of emotion, a lot of adrenaline, finding out. But I had to go back to normal because you still have your family and your job and everything else. I wasn't working at the time, but I still had to wake up with my son and do everything. Now, a year and a half later, it's more I'm worried about what the status is of my brothers. So I think it's more of like, okay, my status is out of the way. I learned whether or not I have it, but now what about my three brothers, or what about my cousins, or what about this person? So it's more now about getting that information out there for them to decide. So it's just like an ongoing thing. So yeah, I think life is back to normal, but yet you appreciate every day. I think that's probably the best way I can put it.
Okay, so here's our last question. Now, having found out your status, let's say somebody has now decided they want to get tested. They've already gone through their first counseling session and they're waiting for their result. Is there any one piece of advice that you'd like to give them at this moment?
I think the thing is they have to realize that they are brave going up to this point and that they'll be able to handle whatever results they're given. And just know that there is hope out there for treatment. I mean, if you don't have support through studies, there's support through Youngtimers. There's other people out there just like you, and you're not alone.
Thank you so much, Kristina. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. You're not alone. And before we say goodbye, I just want to say again, thank you so much, Kristina, for being so open with us. This is one of the hardest things to go through in life when you have this disease, this dark cloud of what if I carry it. There's a lot of milestones, and genetic testing is definitely one of those milestones in all of our journeys with early onset familial Alzheimer's disease. So despite it being hard, I'm so thankful that you were willing to share your story with us. I think it'll be so helpful. So thank you so much for joining us, and for all of you out there who are struggling with this big decision, I just want you to know, again, as Kristina said, you're not alone. And we do have a new organization just to helping you out. So if you would like to talk to somebody who'd like Kristina, who's already found out their status, if you just want to talk to people about what it's like to be at risk, we do have some support groups that are running, and we'd be happy to have you join us. Or we have a one-on-one mentoring program if you'd like to speak with somebody individually. Whatever you need, just visit our website at www.youngtimers.org and just click on the link to send me an email or to join a support group, and we'll be happy to connect with you. Take care.